Your body carries stress, anxiety, and emotions. Daily life is a lot to manage, and you need tools that help your whole self. Thus, Movement Genius has created mental health tools, stress and anxiety relief, and movement classes that improve well-being. Co-founded by siblings Alyson Stoner and Correy O'Neill, Movement Genius is a digital wellness platform that provides live and on-demand classes to help you improve your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Classes are designed by a diverse range of psychotherapists and experts who incorporate evidence-based techniques proven to reduce stress, release tension, and support your mood and mindset. You can learn more and register at movementgenius.com. Welcome back to Normalize The Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicherter, and today I'm joined by co-founder of Movement Genius, Alyson Stoner. Alyson, thank you so much for joining me for today's conversation. Before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
Thank you so much for having me. I feel delighted at the moment to be speaking with you. Before this, I was in a 6-hour meeting for company development. So my mind is slightly exhausted. I also stayed up late working, so I'm a little under-resourced, and yet I truly feel this bubbliness, just hearing you speak and knowing that we're going to have a great conversation about something, we're so passionate about.
Thank you for being so honest and transparent. A lot of times with how are you, people just kind of brush it off and they're like, oh, I'm good. But it's nice to know that we all have so many things on our plates. It's okay if we're exhausted, if we're feeling a little deprived, and that we can still show up and be honest. So thank you for that. And before we begin, can you tell us a little bit more about Movement Genius?
Yes, for those of you who are not aware, I founded a company called Movement Genius, and it's dedicated to providing stress relief techniques, mental health tools, and full body movement classes that improve well-being. And what's different about Movement Genius compared to all these other kind of mental health apps and, talk therapy solutions and even taking medication is that a lot of times when we think about mental health, we only focus on what's going on in our minds. And in reality, when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed and we're in that fight or flight mode, really what's taking over is our nervous system. It's our body that's sort of driving the car. So in order for us to help our minds, we actually have to learn how to help our bodies feel safe enough to relax. And so Movement Genius is dedicated to creating all of these kinds of mind-body tools that don't just help your, mind feel better, but truly help your entire self feel like, okay, I can release this stress, I can check in, reconnect, and really manage what I'm going through. It's essentially like the go-to place to get all of those tools we all needed, but maybe didn't get growing up, so that we feel like, okay, we feel empowered in our well-being journey, as opposed to feeling stuck in patterns or disconnected or just, overwhelmed by everything that's on our plate. So yes, and we'll make sure that everyone listening, if it feels like, oh, that's something I need right now, we'll get you a special discount code so you can try it for free and join the community. We'd love to have you.
I'm so excited for that discount code. But what I love about what you do is growing up, I didn't know that there were other things I could do. I felt so helpless waiting for my therapist to save me because I didn't know how to take charge of my own therapy. I didn't relying on medication, relying on all these other tools and never feeling like I had it in me to help myself. And when I discovered how much just going for a walk or shaking out my body or having a dance party, just something moving my body really helped alleviate that stress. So you are helping people going from feeling, I don't want to say helpless, but really feeling a little bit helpless to feeling empowered and in charge.
You are naming it 100%. That is the intention. And it connects to my personal story, which is similar. You mentioned having some experience with therapy, having some experience with medication. But what do I do in between sessions? What do I do when no one else is around and it's just my thoughts? It's just the anxiety in my chest. It's just that feeling of being on the verge of panic and knowing like, I have to figure this out right now. That's when, we need to know those tools. And what I love about mind body techniques is that you don't need expensive equipment. You don't need special fancy experiences. It is literally learning how to listen to your own mind and body, build that awareness and that trust, and over time feel legitimately confident to be able to meet yourself where you are. Because as you mentioned beforehand, I used to just feel like it almost felt like I was an enemy to myself. And so I was not only dealing with stressors and challenges in the external world, but then I was like working against myself on top of it. So, this helps you experience that sense of like harmony internally and to feel like, okay, we got this. It might be a challenging moment, but I know that in these moments, these are my go-to tools and I've got options. I'm not stuck here alone. And like that to me, is so encouraging. And it ends up changing how I feel like I can show up in life in different situations. Instead of feeling like, oh, I'm going to have too much social anxiety, I can't even go to that thing. Now I'm like, oh, here's what I do before, during, and after that. And now that I'm getting into the habit of trying these things that I used to be afraid of trying or taking risks that I used to avoid, now my life is actually expanding. I'm like, deepening relationships, whereas I used to close off. I'm taking chances with my career. Like I actually get to flourish, not just survive, but flourish. So that is like the vision and hope with Movement Genius is how can we each feel like, okay, we got this. and also to just find like-minded community of real humans who are like figuring it out in a way that works for them authentically.
Yes, figuring it out together is so amazing. With social media, it kind of has felt, at least for me, like everyone around me has it figured out and that I'm the only one behind. So having that community is incredible. But going back to what you said about having those tools, we grow up and no one talks to us about what to do, about how to cope, about how to prevent feeling this way, getting overwhelmed. We're all going to get overwhelmed. We're all going to get stressed, whether it's from pressures of school, family life, work, figuring out who we are, kind of testing societal norms. All these different factors will cause the stress. And without knowing what to do, without having these coping skills, without having any tools in our box on how to move through it and get through it, we tend to crack under the pressure. And I know that happened to me where I ended up in a psych ward before I realized, hey, I need help. What was it like for you trying to figure out maybe that moment where this isn't working and I need to find something else?
Yes, well, I too was in an inpatient facility, and I knew before then that something wasn't right. And what I noticed was just I was fixating on certain things. And instead of just having, a day where I would think about what I'm eating for lunch and then I'd go on with my day, suddenly food became something to obsess over. And then it wasn't just, okay, I went to the gym and now I go on with my day. Now it was obsessing over exercise. And then it was obsessing over, wanting to be perfect in all of my interactions with people. And it just was this constant hamster wheel of trying to control and curate everything that I did, everything I said, pleasing people. All of it just was like so taxing all the time. And I felt like my life was shrinking. Like instead of becoming more confident, I was actually feeling more insecure, more self-conscious. I was doubting myself. And then because I felt overwhelmed and like everything else was out of control in my life, I was just trying to latch on to whatever I could to make sense of the world. And two things came to mind during that time. One, because I didn't have this education on how my nervous system worked and like the fact that, hey, if I went through some, scary or even traumatizing experiences earlier, that might shape, why I'm this reactive in this situation. I didn't know that. So I just always thought there's something wrong with me. Like I'm at fault. I'm messed up. I'm broken. And that narrative really stuck with me until I learned this basic education of my own biology, my own mind body connection. And I felt like freed from judging myself so much. And then the second thing is when I was an inpatient, I realized like I I have been putting my health and well-being so far on the back burner, but if I were to actually lay this strong foundation, every single area of my life would improve. So why am I not prioritizing this? And of course, like it can be intimidating to start unpacking like what's underneath there. Um, but I promise you it's so worth becoming curious and having that compassionate exploration, because you really start to reclaim that sense of um, empowerment. And so yeah, I was, dealing with an eating disorder, an exercise addiction, workaholism, and my health was deteriorating. I was very isolated, so I was not really staying in touch with many friends. And if so, like it wasn't very deep connection. And and I just felt like a shell of myself. Just like offline and numb. And so, started going to therapy, exploring things, and it took a while. Like it wasn't as if I just woke up one day and felt like, I'm healed. Um, but I will say that something that was really encouraging throughout the journey was to remember, if on the other side of this is the promise of, joy or confidence or hope, I get to actually experience little bits of each of those along the way. So I don't have to wait to wake up someday and feel confident. I actually can lean into what would provide that sense of confidence right now. I can start feeling small amounts of joy, to the degree that I can handle right now. Like it doesn't have to be entirely no pain, no gain, or like it's going to be so hard, but it's worth it. Like, I think that narrative in our society is sometimes unhelpful. On the one hand, it's super important to realize, like, yeah, it might take some persistence and patience. On the other hand, it's important to recognize if you're intending to be well, then you actually get to feel better along the way. Like if something's feeling really detrimental and harmful and horrible, like that might not be the path.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that idea in society where you have to go from that point of feeling completely numb or hurt or in pain, and then all of a sudden you're gonna snap your fingers, wake up, and everything's better. Or that you're stuck there. That's another thing. There's this mindset that, oh, just have a positive mindset. Stop thinking about it. Stop overwhelming yourself and you'll be fine. You'll wake up and you'll feel better. And then that doesn't happen. And again, internalizing what's wrong with me. Why didn't that happen? But listening to you and your story feels like listening to bits and pieces of mine, because that's something that I struggled with. I struggled with an eating disorder on and off. Struggled with that feeling of control because everything around me felt like it was outside of control. I had this idea in my head when I was 12 that I was going to put this business together and get everything. And then that became my life up until this point. It still like that workaholic mindset. And it becomes so overwhelming and people don't talk about it enough. So thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that, because without those conversations, I mean, I talk a lot, clearly, and I talk about my story and what I've gone through so much, but I don't often get to hear it in reverse. I don't often get to hear and resonate with it. So it's so nice on my end, I want to say, to have someone, not that you struggled, but to have someone who understands what it's like to work through that and to know that I'm really not alone in it. And I think that's what's so great about these conversations, about the community you're building, is that we don't have to feel so alone in it.
Yeah. And two things came up when you were speaking. One is you and I have actually experienced a bit of a before and after. And if someone listening hasn't necessarily arrived at that sense of after, like, oh, I'm finally, feeling better. What is encouraging to realize is that our minds, just the way our minds and brains work, we carry one version of reality, a map of reality, a story of how we think everything is working. And sometimes in that map, there are some thoughts or patterns that, yes, aren't as helpful. And those are the areas maybe that we're like wanting to heal or to shift a bit. And sometimes I think when we examine that story, we assume that it's true just because it's the first story we got. So it feels the most real. It feels like, hey, but there's evidence for why I believe this about myself. Hey, but there were real experiences that prove this is true about life. And in reality, when we start to realize, like, actually, that story can evolve, we just have to start, introducing new perspectives, new practices. You can legitimately transform an experience that before and after, where now today, like if you would have asked me 10 years ago to talk about the experience of anxiety, it would have felt like anxiety was this huge presence, that I was super small and powerless, and that anxiety just like showed up unannounced all the time, seemingly interrupting anything that felt important to me. And now, if you ask me about anxiety, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. That natural response in my body when it feels like something might be a little scary or uncertain. And, right, that's what I just need to help myself feel safe again. And okay, I'm going to do this tool and I'm going to say, hey, I understand self. Like, all right, you're having a moment. That's normal. It's okay. And you use this tool, you're going to feel better. And then you're going to move on and do the thing anyway that scares you. Like, I would not have believed that I could feel this at ease talking about something that used to be debilitating. So I just wanted to name, like, for people who are maybe in the thick of something and they're wondering, will it ever stop? Will it ever change? Sometimes we really just have to repeatedly introduce that new story, that new perspective, those new practices to literally retrain our mind, to retrain our nervous system. And you can legitimately feel a different quality of life. You don't have to stay in that story, even though it feels so real and so like it's fixed. We are always evolving, and we really can help ourselves evolve in this way if we're open to it.
Isn't it amazing what education and resources can do for us?
Totally.
That story, like you said, that we have in our heads, that it's never going to get better. That is something that's so common. And when retraining our thoughts, retraining our brain, kind of rephrasing, what advice do you have for people who want to, but they don't know where to start?
That's a great question. So I would say the first place to begin is to take anything I say with a grain of salt and to start rebuilding trust with yourself, to be able to say, actually, I can listen in and ask myself what would feel helpful? What do I think might work? Because I can give you suggestions all day long, and I will give you some ideas and starting points, but each of us, wellness looks different for each of us, and our schedules, our personalities all function differently. So if I say, you just have to recite this 3 times a day for the next 3 months, for some people that might be perfect because they're like super organized, stick to the routine, and they add it to their calendar and signed, sealed, delivered. For others, they're like, I have never stuck with anything more than 2 days in a row, so I don't know what you want from me. So what I will say is first really inviting that sense of, could I be willing to listen to what I might need in this moment, and to start rebuilding that trust with myself. Then some practical suggestions. A lot of people talk about using affirmations. And one thing that I found is when I first started using affirmations, they all felt very cheesy, and they all felt very like I just doubted what I was saying. It's like I do not believe this at all. And what was interesting is instead of trying to force myself to believe something else, I started picturing it just as if, well, I've tried it the other way a bunch of times already. I might as well try on something new and see if it like has a different outcome. And so instead of pressuring myself to believe something, it became more of a curious experiment of like, what if this were true? And, instead of trying to just make that switch right away, I imagined as if that new affirmation or that new viewpoint was just like a new person in the room. And I didn't necessarily have to become them. I just was like inviting some curiosity, like, okay, letting them have a little bit more input. And that, I guess, took the pressure off of trying to convince myself of something that didn't seem true. And for me, I legitimately listened to affirmations every single night, played them while I was sleeping. Who knows if that actually worked, but for me, it feels like one day over time, I did wake up and I started feeling like, whoa, I'm entertaining new views of myself that once felt impossible to believe. So that's one practical suggestion. Another is to, instead of jumping into something specific to do, just start with some reflections on what is the story that I've been carrying about myself, and where did that story originate? At what point in my life did those thoughts come online? Was there a specific event? Was there a certain person who kind of speaks this way, and I've actually just taken on their perspective as my own? What about, media and my upbringing and culture and all these things? And really just start to tease out the elements of the story. And by doing that, hopefully it also helps create some space between you feeling like you are identified with that story and you realizing these things kind of came into being at some point, and there's still a more core version of myself underneath all that I can tap into again and reconnect with beyond all of this extra story. So I might suggest, either the positive affirmations or reflecting on whose story you are actually embodying every day, just to create some space and to open up to the possibility of if you wrote one story one time, you can write another, just to kind of get the juices flowing.
Yes. For me, it was, I'm not this damsel in distress that needs everyone to save her, but I am powerful and in charge of my own story and where I go and what I can do. And that was so hard to unlearn because every fairy tale, every interaction with my loved ones, it was all people saving me, people kind of pulling me in line, keeping me somewhere, physically moving my body and putting me somewhere. So I was taught that everything around me meant I was just stuck. and I was not in charge. I was waiting to be saved. And when I finally started to rewrite that story, I gained so much confidence in my own voice. I'd never stopped talking since. It's bad, but it's amazing because I finally feel like I have a voice.
Yes. You brought up such an important point, and I don't know if you've touched on this in other episodes yet, but as we begin to shift and experiment with new ways of seeing ourselves in the world, it's sometimes met with resistance from the people around us because naturally we got into that relationship dynamic as one version of ourselves. And so now that we're shifting, it can create a bit of, dissonance or challenges with other people. And it may be conscious, people might be like, hey, I don't like, what you're becoming. Or it may be unconscious where people feel like, hey, you're not the person you used to be, and so our typical way of relating is now not as smooth, or I'm not getting what I needed because you're changing. So it's important to recognize like there might be some recalibrating with friends, with family, as you learn how to, for example, like use your voice to set a boundary. If someone has never heard you set a boundary before, they don't know how to react to that part of you and that version of you. So it might not just like go over perfectly the first time. And you may find some people go, oh, hey, I'm hearing that you're now needing this from me and I respect that. Great. For others, it might be, well, actually, I was here because I used to be able to get anything I needed from you whenever I wanted. So now I'm not interested. And so there's going to be like some shifts. And what happens for me when I feel that shift happening around, I really try to focus on the concept of wholeness. And I say, okay, but is what I'm doing, am I aiming to become a more whole version of myself? And if so, I'm going to continue leaning in and try to extend that version of myself to others. But if I find like how I'm showing up is actually leading to a lesser sense of wholeness, and I'm feeling more like this might not be helpful, it might be a little harmful or destructive or toxic or whatever the words are that people use, then I'll pause and readjust. But like not everyone is going to maybe come along for the full journey with you or in the way that you might have hoped. But if you're committed to wholeness, I believe that's a worthwhile endeavor to continue healing, maturing, evolving, and, making peace with the fact that like things will shift as a result. You can still extend love to everyone, even if they might not be around for the next chapter.
That commitment to wholeness is so important because relationships do change. I lost so many relationships that I thought were like the person I thought would always be there and always be in my life is one of the people I run into a grocery store and maybe say hi, maybe we walk other directions. It's just changed so much because when I got my voice, the relationship changed. I was no longer afraid to say that's wrong or that's not okay or I'm not comfortable. Before I would have gone along with it. And in the beginning, oh my goodness, did I question my voice when people started reacting differently? And I felt like I was maybe losing respect from them because they didn't like when I responded. To get the confidence to say, like you said, that commitment to wholeness, say, no, this is good for me. This is right. I feel stronger. I feel better. I feel like I'm in charge of my story and I'm not being held back and I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not putting like bad vibes out to other people. I am just respecting and loving myself for the first time in my life.
Yes. And, there's an interesting fine line here between, wanting to mature and set boundaries and name your needs in a respectful way. And then this other narrative that's kind of popular as well, which is this like, I'm just going to do me and you have to take it and deal with it or you're not my people. And what's interesting is like sometimes I think there are, you could say there's like the helpful version of something, and then there's like maybe the shadow side of that quality. And when it comes to media and social media in particular, I think, people talk about things like self-care, they talk about things like setting boundaries, and yet some of the substance of what they're saying might not actually reflect the mature, empathic approach. It might still be a bit like, my way or the highway, or like, I only want to do what feels good. Which might sound fun in the moment, but then in times when you actually have to do hard things and get things done that you don't feel like doing, like you might not have that muscle. So a word that I think about in addition to wholeness is the concept of resilience. And sometimes when I'm looking at different posts, even if they're saying like, oh, this is a thing for self-care or for setting boundaries, if I notice that the outcome is actually someone who's kind of shrinking away from dealing with their problems, or like avoiding the discomfort of having to heal and grow, I just ask myself, is is this the most helpful version of this information, or do I want to maybe sift through some other posts from, other therapists on Instagram that I trust a little bit more, or something like that. So that's just something to keep in mind, is like, it can be a clunky journey when you're first learning how to use your voice. And it's not like we're all going to know exactly what to say and how to say it. And of course, then everyone will also have a certain perception of what we're doing that may or may not be what we intended. So that it can be messy. Communication, all of this can be kind of messy. But if we want to maybe just really listen to, like, are we becoming more resilient through this process and growing in our ability to not only love ourselves, but also love others better? And if so, great. But if it's just kind of like this hidden mechanism that's still just protecting you from ever feeling like you did anything wrong, or feeling like, you know, like everyone else is a part of the problem, but you're not, it might be worth pausing and just taking inventory. Do you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes
Yes.
people talk about self-care and I'm like, okay, that could be a version for sometimes. And then like also some things that you're saying, I don't know if that's actually self-care. Totally.
It's so funny you bring that up because that was what I was exploring all night last night, which is why I haven't slept, is where is that boundary between a defense mechanism trying to protect ourselves and caring for only pieces of ourselves and what we want others to see versus how we want to love ourselves, to be authentic, show up and attract people who want to be around there and be able to communicate with everyone and find that line for ourselves. And it's so hard because innately we want to protect ourselves, of course. No one wants to be like, yes, I want to feel sad today and I want to feel angered. We don't wake up naturally thinking that way. But being able to recognize that point of this isn't helpful for me, because when you're blocking yourself from feeling, first of all, you're not feeling that height of the joy, just like you're not feeling the low of the low.
Yes, that was a huge thing for me in treatment, was realizing, oh, when I shut off all of the difficult feelings, I also shut off the positive experiences as well. And it took a long time to feel into the hurtful wounds that I wanted to heal, as well as the beautiful joys. Like I could only do them in small increments at a time, and that's okay. So it's important to acknowledge that, like, each of us have a different capacity, a different bandwidth to be able to dig into this kind of reflection or development, and to really honor that pace, and to really honor um, that particular moment. If you just mentioned, like, okay, we only got a couple hours of sleep, and now we want to dig into this huge, wound that we're wanting to unpack. in this conversation, like I might be a little under-resourced to tackle all of that right now. So it might be a more loving thing to do, as well as helpful for my nervous system to be able to tolerate, if I only try to tackle a piece of it, just like the top right corner. That's it. Like not the whole thing, just the top right corner. And then, tomorrow, if I have a little bit more capacity, great. Like we'll dig in a little bit further. But a part of healing is also really honoring the bandwidth you have so that you don't push yourself to an unmanageable place and then feel like you've now taken steps backwards and you're feeling worse than you even did before you started. So like building that muscle at your pace there's such wisdom in that. And, learning how to cultivate that trust with yourself, I think tends to build confidence to be able to tackle these harder issues and more complex or uncomfortable topics, because you've built that muscle now. You can sit with that discomfort. So, that's been something I've learned is like, I really have to be patient and meet myself where I am in that moment. And that's actually the most effective thing I could do, is to honor that.
Oh my goodness. It's so easy to want to tackle the whole staircase today and run that stadium. But sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, it takes step by step work. And some steps may be this big and some steps may be this big. Some steps may seem flat for a little bit, and that's okay. It's all at our own pace. And for me, it was the comparison game that felt like other people were tackling these things a lot quicker than I was. And in some things, I did it quicker. Some things I did it a lot slower. Some things I'm still learning and processing. But that idea in our heads that we have to go from here to here overnight is so hard.
I mean, I'm saying it because I need the reminder as well. There are days when it happened recently, actually. I am in a relationship right now, and I didn't start dating until after I was 18. And so I felt kind of inexperienced in a lot of ways, when a lot of my friends were like out there having, girlfriends, boyfriends, people at like 14 years old. And here I was like, I don't even know what to say on a first date. Still don't. But I am currently with a partner, and there's something about the way our personalities interact where we are such a great fit in some ways. And then we've got certain areas where like, a weak spot of mine really activates their, a struggle that they're having, and vice versa. And I had this reaction to something they said. And it was so interesting because in the moment I felt upset with them, but I knew deep down that it wasn't actually their fault. It was channeling something way deeper inside me from like, a younger wound and an issue that I hadn't yet dealt with. And while I thought that I had kind of already examined these things and worked through them, that was a moment that like reactivated this deep wound. And I responded in a way that was like, oh, this does not feel good at all. Like, I don't like that I'm speaking this way. I don't like that I'm feeling this way. I don't like that I'm viewing my partner this way. Like, what is going on? So yes, I'm sharing it as a reminder because I think about healing and growth in the terms of a spiral staircase, where you might be, taking those steps and winding up to the next level. And as you make that rotation, you'll eventually sort of be, back to where it looks like you're at the same starting point. But in reality, you've grown since the last time you were looking at that view. You might still revisit that issue, but you've got a little bit more wisdom since the last time you were there. And so when all of that came up with my partner, I first felt like, oh, I'm still back here. And then I realized, wait, no, I've climbed this staircase several times since then. There's still that wound. There's still a little more to examine, but let me also invite that wisdom that I've developed over the last, many years of exploration. So, yes, patience, of course, we're going to be revisiting things, but it does get a little bit easier each time. Or you just feel, I guess, a little more equipped, less surprised. You're like, you again. Yes, yes, yes. Of course you would be here. Thanks for trying to protect me. Thanks for trying to do life in the way that you know. It's not very helpful anymore, so we're going to try a new way. Like, come with me into the new land.
That awareness, when you can actually recognize it and recognize it quickly. It used to take me, I didn't recognize it ever. And then it got to a point where I recognized it maybe a couple months later. I was like, oh, yeah, no. And then now being able to recognize it, whether it's immediately within the hour, within the day, within the week, getting that quicker. I was triggered by something and now I have the tools. Let me go and see what I can do to support myself and then build that communication and the language to let the other person know it wasn't you. It was me 120%. And I'm working on it because for me, it's that open communication because it's so easy for me specifically to destroy relationships by not communicating that this was a trigger that I had and there are things I can do.
I appreciate you saying that. And I relate to having that. For me, it felt like a sense of lag where something would happen and it would take so long for me to actually process it and have language for it. And so, yes, it has gotten a little bit easier to feel like I have a vocabulary and some go-to words of like, I'm familiar with this. But there still is a way you named something so helpful, which is, okay, now that I'm a little bit more aware, I can communicate this to the other person. And I'm now learning that there may be times when I don't have the words yet, but it's still important for me at that point to communicate that I am looking for the words. So I don't have to wait until I've figured out exactly what to say. There's a step in my communication with partners or family or anyone to say, hey, I'm still processing. So if I'm not speaking yet, or if I don't know what to say, I'm just letting you know, like, I'm processing. The wheel is turning, and like, I promise I'm committed to letting you know when I have more information. And that's helped so much. Also to relieve some of the pressure on myself to like process as fast as my partner can. Like, my partner can have something happen and then they can just like understand exactly what they were experiencing and then articulate it really clearly and like move on. I still often take like a couple days to figure out what just happened. So, being able to communicate that and also um, build relationships, friendships, connections where people are saying, hey, it's okay that you process slower. I'll be here when you're ready. Or in the meantime, like, can you just let me know that you do want to talk about this at some point? And like learning each other's languages is, I mean, the essence of probably successful partnerships. Communication. But it does start with yourself for sure. Like, what am I experiencing? And yeah, for some of us, it's not second nature, myself included.
And communicating when you're ready, what you can, like you said, that I'm still processing. I'm such a big believer in communication. I feel like it's so important, even if I, again, don't have the words. Sometimes I'm like, here's a song that I'm resonating with right now. I don't know why, figuring it out, but this is what I'm feeling. And I don't know if you can interpret it, but just so you know, this is where I'm at. Because sometimes, as much as I love to talk, I don't always have the words, but I have, whether it's like, this quote resonated with me or this song, or I have no idea where I'm at, but like, thank you for being here and not kind of walking out when I felt like I was falling apart, and having those friends who maybe in the heat of the moment, we walked out of the room and we were mad at each other, but I got that, how can I support you text, or are you okay? Right. And me knowing that I can do that too, but that was based on communication of, can I say that? What would you like me to say in that moment? because if we did not communicate, there was no chance when we're mad, we would have been like, goodbye.
Right. You brought up something that's so important. You mentioned, sometimes we don't have words, but we feel a piece of music, or there's these, nonverbal ways of communicating. Maybe it's our body language. Like, I can tell if I'm feeling a little nervous now because my hands will get clammy and I'll start to just curl my body inward. So like I'll cross my legs, I'll cross my arms, I'll, actually try to almost like take up less space and hide in plain sight. And so I'm learning my own nonverbal ways of communicating so that if I notice myself doing things, I can actually, check in and adjust. But the reason I draw attention to your point around music is because a part of what's interesting about like checking in with how we're feeling is, I'm going to get a little scientific and a little geeky for a second. So before we learned our first verbal language, if we are verbal, before we established our first verbal language, we had already experienced in our bodies our basic beliefs about what it means to relate to other people, who feels safe, what environments feel safe, how to attach and connect to others. And that all happened before we had words. So when we're going through things now, and sometimes we feel like we don't have words, it might legitimately be because it's connected to something that we only were experiencing as sensations in the body. And that's actually one of the main reasons why with Movement Genius, we have these mind-body tools, because sometimes we're not going to know the words, we're not going to have language, but really we need to access what's going on in our bodies. And movement, even if it's small motions, just, breathing in and out, or a light stretch, or as you mentioned, kind of shaking out some of the stress, those subtle movements can help us process and express and release what we're feeling that we can't seem to find language for. So I'm glad you brought that up, because in our culture, we often give primacy to like the written word and to language. And that's only one way that our body is interpreting our experience. Movement, body language, becoming aware of that story is like just as important and just as an essential factor to actually finding well-being.
Exactly. And as we're running out of time, bringing it back to Movement Genius, one thing that I absolutely love that you do is there's a range of different exercises and videos. So you have one where it's the affirmations, which by the way, love, and you're dancing to the affirmations and saying them out loud. You have ones, the somatic yoga, things that are a little more difficult, that take a little bit more movement. You have them for not just individuals who are able-bodied, but for everyone. So can you talk a little bit more about the inclusivity of the platform so people know there is something for everyone?
100%. So I'm glad you brought that up. We actually have over 200 videos now, and a lot of the new videos don't require really any physical movement. So they are mental health tools, stress relief techniques that you can use anytime, anywhere, whether you're seated, standing, lying down. And you mentioned accessibility and inclusivity. We are building that as our DNA. Like that's from the ground up. We're thinking, how can everyone be able to find something for their specific need in that moment, as well as a tool that actually works for their mind and body, however they naturally operate. And so we have classes with a variety of instructors. Many are living with a variety of different kinds of disabilities, so visible and invisible. Many instructors come from a variety of backgrounds where, they might have been like othered in terms of typical wellness platform is only built, by and for a very narrow group of people. And so we've got instructors who literally just represent what humans actually look like and feel like and experience. And they happen to be really wonderful experts. And so you can find, something that is casual, easygoing, quick. You can find something that's, a full length class if you're really wanting to have that deeper sense of reconnection. But it is always on the premise of honoring exactly where you are in that moment and going at the pace, exploring the movements that actually feel good for you right then and there. So it is not like some pressure fitness platform, and it's definitely not like no one's being graded. It's literally, how can we serve you in this moment? How can we support you? And how can you feel empowered to help yourself in this moment? So we've got, 200 classes on demand. And then we also have our weekly live classes. And I love those because we just have the community get a chance to check in with each other and to see like other real humans on the journey with you. And the fact that like wellness looks different for everyone on our platform. So there's no like one size fits all destination. It's very much like really learning how to celebrate your unique experience of well-being. Because that to me sounds way more interesting than all of us trying to just like check the box of what we think we're supposed to do to be well. I want you to feel like you get to flourish in your individuality. So yeah, come as you are, no equipment needed, just your mind and body, and, filter through the classes, find something that seems interesting, try it, let me know what you think.
That's what I love so much about what you do is you're not making us all fit into a box, which has been primarily what movement has been about. It's been about trying to fit into this box and then have the same end goal as everyone else. But you're giving us all the space to be who we are and feel the way that we want to feel. And it's just, you're absolutely amazing. And it was a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much. Yes, it was such a delight, and make sure you all use the discount code. I would love to meet everyone. So if you're listening, come join for one of the live classes as well and say like, hey, I was listening to the podcast. Because I just like to be able to see you and to know you and to be in the experience with you all. We're all in it together.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.